Okay, let's keep reading the 13th Reality Journal of Curious Letters. We're up to the chapter 45, which is called the 13th Reality.
You mean the 14th?
Okay. Mistress Jane sat on her throne, eyes closed, deep in thought, as she waited for her next visitor. What a life mine has become. So many people hated and despised her, wished she was dead. But they simply did not understand. All of her cruelty and harsh rule had a purpose, and someday the realities would know of her goodness. All she wanted was to make life better. What a poor existence the wretches of Reality Prime eked out from day to day. It was a marvel they continued on, despite the drab bleakness of their lives. No power, no joy, no colour. Jane would change all of that. The new and improved version of the Cicada made every second a wonderful moment, and it must be shared, it must be spread. The Realitants had always talked about finding utopian reality someday, a paradise on earth. Jane could make it happen. She was so close to implementing her plan, one by one she would fragment and destroy the branching realities until only Prime and the 13th remained. Then, with an army such as never before witnessed in all of history, she would take over Reality Prime, consuming it with mutated Cicada. Only then could the universe be rebuilt, one world at a time, a better place for all. In a million years, her name would still be remembered with love and worship. She needed help, of course. She'd sent a letter to a very important person, setting up a meeting on the 13th of May, a meeting that represented the final and most important part of her plan. Only one more week, she thought. If Reginald Chew agreed to her terms at that meeting, nothing could stop her. Nothing, especially not the pathetic and laughable Master George and his dwindling Realitants. Just hours earlier, she'd finally initiated the attack on his headquarters, an act for which she'd shown much patience, having wanted to do it for years. One more week until the meeting with Chew, the final piece of the puzzle. Jane opened her eyes. It was time to speak with Gunn. Frasier felt sweat seeping into his eyebrows from his forehead, as if the skin itself were melting. He stood before the huge wooden door with its iron bindings and handle, barely able to breathe as he waited for the horrible thing to open. He had failed miserably, and there was no telling how Mistress Jane might react. Sometimes she was very merciful to her failures, allowing them to die with a quick snap of her fingers, probably. A quick snap of her, a quick snap of her odd abilities in this place. At other times, she displayed much less kindness. Jane had immense amounts of control over the mutated Cicada that existed in the 13th, and she loved to experiment. A muted thump sounded from the other side of the door, followed by the odd sound of something dissolving, like the scratchy rush of poured sand or the amplified roar of a million termites devouring a house. A hole appeared in the middle of the door, expanding outwards like a ripple in a pond, devouring the wood and iron of the door as it grew until the entrance to Jane's throne room was completely open. Why can't she just open the door? Frasier thought to himself. Always has to show off her twisted power. Frasier steeled himself, promising himself he would remain dignified as he met his fate. He knew he had only one chance to redeem his folly and perhaps to save his life. Smoothing his filthy shirt, he stepped forward into the gaudy and ridiculous throne room of Mistress Jane. From top to bottom, side to side, the room was a complete sea of yellow. Tapestries of yellow people on yellow horses in fields of yellow daisies, yellow padded chairs on yellow rugs on top of yellow carpets, the walls, the couches, the paintings, the pillows, the servants' clothing, the lamps, the books, even the wood and bricks of the fireplace had been painted yellow. It made Fraser sick to his stomach and reminded him once again that the woman he'd chosen to follow was completely insane. But Fraser knew one day Jane would snap and someone would need to replace her. That's where I come in, he thought. If only I can survive this day. A buzzing sound from above made him look up to see two large insects flying down towards him. Snooper bugs, he thought. Could she be any more paranoid? The enormous winged creatures flew around him in a tight circle, their cellophane wings flapping in a blur, their elongated beaks snipping at his clothes and poking at his skin. Fraser winced, but kept still and silent, knowing the vicious things could get quite nasty if he didn't submit completely. Finally, after inflicting dozens of tiny wounds all over his body, the two snoopers flew back to their nests. They didn't need to communicate anything further to Jane. If Fraser had been holding any poisons or weapons, he'd be dead. "Come forward," a gruff voice said from the side. Fraser looked over to see a grotesquely fat man who looked like a hideous cross between a dwarf and a troll, hovering 10 feet in the air, his plump legs dangling. His head, face and chest were covered in dark greasy hair, and he wore nothing but a wide skirt around his middle, proudly displaying his disgustingly bloated skin. "The mistress will see you now." He held out a flabby arm, gesturing deep into the throne room. "Hurry, she's a busy woman." Fraser shuddered and followed the guard's instructions. Staring straight ahead, he didn't stop walking until he reached the kneeling pillow of Mistress Jane, where he did as countless others had done before him, dropping to his knees and kissing the ground before him. Then, daring to show some boldness, he leaned back on his legs and looked up at the preposterous throne. It was black. Mistress Jane had never explained to anyone why her throne was made from completely nondescript, heavy black iron, nor had anyone ever dared to ask. But Fraser thought it must be a symbol that her seat of power was so important she wanted it to stand out among the world of yellow. She sat on her black throne, dressed from head to toe in the colour she so dearly loved. She wore a hat embroidered with lace and daffodils that stretched a foot above her bald head. Her sparkling gown fit her body tightly, covering every inch from the middle of her neck to her shiny yellow heels. Horn-rimmed glasses sat atop her nose, her emerald eyes peering through like focused lasers. Everything about this woman is just weird, Fraser thought as he waited for her to say something. "I don't know why we rescued you," Miss Jane said, her voice taut with barely veiled anger. "We could just as easily have destroyed the complex of that buffoon Master George while you still sat inside, bawling your eyes out." "Yes, Mistress Jane," Fraser replied. He knew better than to say anything else, yet. "We finally had a hope of knowing George's plan once and for all, and you threw it down the drain in exchange for a little fun with your Chew Industries toy and a car. You better hope the attack on George takes care of any loose ends." "Speak!" She belted this last word, causing several nearby servants to gasp. Fraser stumbled on his words. "Mistress Jane, I never intended to kill them. I only meant to scare them enough to talk. I failed, and I'm sorry." Jane stood up, her reddening face all the fiercer against the yellow background of her hat and dress. "They did not die, you blubbering sack of drool." Fraser couldn't hide his shock at hearing this. How in the world did they escape before the car? He knew that now was not the time to wonder. Now was the time for apologies and grovelling. "I'm very sorry, Mistress Jane." "Listen to me well, Fraser Gunn," Jane said as she sat back down on her throne, "and let my servants put this on record. I give you one spoken sentence only to convince me why I should not send you to your death at the hands of the scallywag beasts, and not the nice ones that only take a week to digest their food." Fraser closed his eyes, throwing all of his mental powers into quashing the rising panic and constructing a single sentence that could save his life. He had nothing, Nothing, but then a single word popped into his head, giving him an idea. It was desperate, but his only shot. Quickly, in his mind, he visualized each word of a sentence one by one, going over them several times. Finally, he opened his eyes and spoke. Master George has a spy in your presence, and I know who it is. Jane's eyes screwed up into tight wrinkles. Her brow creased. She folded her arms, studying Frasier for a long moment. "Nitwit!" she suddenly screamed, causing even more servants to gasp. Frasier jumped, his heart sinking to the floor. But before he could utter another word, a young girl dressed entirely in yellow zoomed through the air from the back of the room, stopping to hover directly in front of Frasier, facing Jane. No one had figured out how Jane used the mutated cicada to enable flight, but seeing people flying always gave Frasier the creeps. It seemed so unnatural. "Yes, mistress?" a high-pitched voice asked. "Fetch me a banana sandwich." Jane leaned to the side, peering down at Frasier. "We have much to discuss, and I'm hungry, and make it quick." She clapped her hands, a booming echo that shook the walls. As the little servant flew off to obey Jane's orders, Frasier tried to regain his breath after that frantic moment when he'd thought for sure he'd be killed, all the while in disbelief that Jane could stoop so low as to rename a child Nitwit. Of course, the last one had been named Nincompoop, who had been disposed of once Jane got tired of yelling Nincompoop every time she wanted something. "Frasier?" Jane snapped. "Yes, mistress," he stammered. "Start talking." Frasier told her about Annika. It truly did happen in the blink of an eye, a quick tingle shooting down Tick's spine. The instant Master George pushed the button on top of the barrier wand, the room of the Realitant headquarters vanished, replaced by thousands of massive trees covered in moss. Tick and the other recruits, along with Mothball, stood in a dark forest, hazy sunlight barely breaking through the thick canopy of branches to make small patches of gold on the earthly floor. The haunted sounds of exotic birds and insects filled the creepy woods, smells of roots and rotting leaves wafting through the air. Tick had the uneasy feeling that the forest wanted to eat him alive. "Where are we?" Paul asked, though he must have known the answer. "In the 13th we are, deep in the forest of plague," Mothball whispered. "Forest of plague?" Sophia asked with a snort. "Lovely." "A great battle was fought here," Mothball said, slowly turning as she scanned the ancient trees, most of which were thick enough to make an entire house. Gnarled, twisted branches reached out as if trying to escape their masters. "Many moons ago it was. Thousands died. Their rotting bodies created a plague that was downright nasty. So I've heard, anyway. Must be true, seeing as there's quite a bit of cicada here. Come on, follow me." "Wait," Sato said, trying to sound stern, but coming across as a grumpy jerk. "Tell us the plan before we take a step." Tick rolled his eyes, but quickly, so Sato couldn't see him doing it. Things are scary enough, he thought. Why does this guy have to make it worse? "The plan's quite simple, really," Mothball said, not acting bothered at all. "Right over yonder," she pointed towards an ivory-covered copse of pine trees. "There's some right dandy wind bikes that we can take to meet Master George's spy, Annika. She's been setting things up for months to get closer to the barrier wand. We meet Annika, we get the wand, we come back here in 30 hours and go home." "Sounds too easy," Sato said with a comical sneer. "Sure it is, old chap, sure it is." Mothball turned and walked towards the pine trees. "Got a better idea? Let me know, but best be right quick about it." As Tick and the others followed their 8-foot-tall guide, Sato said from behind, "How do we know we can trust this spy? Maybe she works for Mistress Jane." "Find out soon enough we will," Mothball replied, not slowing at all. "Quit your whining and come on," Sophia snapped. Tick cringed, wishing his friend would ease up on the poor kid. Tick didn't like him either, but Sophia seemed way too harsh. Who knew what Sato might do to retaliate? Begrudgingly, Sato finally started walking. The sounds of footfalls crunching the thick undergrowth of the forest suddenly filled the air, echoing off the canopy of interwoven tree limbs. Tick moved to catch up with Mothball, practically running to keep up with her pace. I have a question. Go on and ask it then. Mothball pushed an enormous branch out of the way that everyone else simply walked under. The alternate versions of ourselves in the other worlds, does that mean that there is one of me in every reality? That's usually the case, it is. We call them alterants. Strange how that all works. Even though the realities can grow in vastly different ways from each other, there seems to be a definite pattern when it comes to the people. What do you mean? Tick asked, stooping to avoid a huge chunk of moss that drooped over a thick limb like a giant beard. Even though a reality may have different governments and cultures and climates and all of that from another reality, the general pedigree of people remains quite similar. Downright spooky it is. A huge bird cawed from overhead, followed by the squeal of a small animal. So in your reality, the fifth it is? Yeah, the fifth. There's a really tall version of me there, my alterant, and he's alive right now with parents named Edgar and Lorena. Chances are you'd be right. Of course, I've never met him and never tried. Dangerous stuff messing with alterants. Sophia and Paul have been following closely and listening to every word while Sato hung back, only a couple of steps behind them. Though he acted indifferent to the conversation, Tick had a feeling Sato was intently paying attention. Why is it dangerous to mess with alterants? Sophia asked. Since I had dealings with Tick in Reality Prime, Mothball said, pausing a second to reassess her bearings. She changed direction slightly and headed down a shallow ravine scattered with boulders among the trees. I didn't want to meet his alterant in any of the other realities. Not only could it make me go mad, it could lead to the little Sir meeting his taller self in my reality. Disaster, that. Why? Paul asked. If two alterants meet and truly recognise each other for what and who they are, well, then only one of the poor blokes can survive. Still trying to figure out why and how, but we are. But one of them, ceases to exist. Sometimes that causes a nasty chain reaction that can rattle the realities to their bones. But bet your best buttons some of the worst earthquakes and such you've had were because of alterants seeing each other. Master George and the Realitants have worked their buns off to avoid such meetings, but Mistress Janes likes to bring alterants together. She thinks it's funny. Mad she is, crazy as a brain-dead bugaboo soldier. That was the second time Tick had heard Mothball refer to bugaboo soldiers, but he was too busy thinking about alterants to ask any more questions. Whoa, man, Paul said. This is some downright freaky stuff. You're telling me that there's all these Pauls running around the universe? I better be a big-time surfer in one of them and a world-class pianist in another. Face it, Sophia said with a smirk, you're a no-talent bum in all of them, just like you are here, or there, or whatever. Paul stuck out his tongue. Sis, you're hilarious. Call me Sis again, Sophia challenged, raising her fists. Sis. Sophia pulled back and punched Paul solidly on his upper arm with a loud thump. Ow! He yelled, rubbing the spot. That's no fair. I can't punch a girl back. Tick laughed, and Mothball surprised everyone when she did too. Glad my pain can give everyone a nice chuckle, Paul said, still wincing. Tick, a word of advice, don't mess with Italians. I learned that from just her emails. Whatever you do, don't rip on her spaghetti. Tick, Sophia said, I like you. You're smart, for an American. Sato completely ignored all of them, never breaking his stoic expression. Before anyone could throw out another sarcastic remark, Mothball stopped next to a big pile of fallen branches and twigs. She turned towards the messy heap and took a deep breath. Here we are! She bent over and yanked on a large branch, pulling it off the stack. A little help would be nice. Tick grabbed a branch and everyone joined in. Even Sato, who was mumbling something Tick couldn't understand. Tick saw a glimmer of metal when he pulled off a prickly branch, his curiosity increasing his pace. Soon they'd cleared the entire pile and all of them stared at what they'd uncovered. 3 sleek and shiny motorcycles were lined up in a row, silver with sparkly metallic red paint. They were the coolest things Tick had ever seen, but there was one thing about them that seemed a little odd. None of them had wheels.